SAFM.
It's 5.5 after 11. Thank you very much, Usile Saku, for the news. You're listening to Morning Talk on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. My name is Rowena Bird, and as we get into the final hour of the program today, we take a look at the 4th Annual Audit Committee Conference. It's currently underway. Today is actually the last day of the conference, which is being held in Sandton. And joining us for this discussion about challenges that these audit committees need to overcome, and also to tell us what the emerging trends are that impact on these audit committees. We're joined by Dr. Nkonki, the chairman of Exaro Resources Limited. Good morning, Dr. Kona. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Zakhele Nkosi is a partner at Nkonki, and he also joins us. Good morning to you, Mr. Nkosi. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And Nkonki put this conference together?
Yes, this is the 4th Annual Audit Committee Conference that we're hosting as Nkonki. And I must be honest, the feedback and the success of the conference is being evident in this 4th year.
All right, and we'll talk more about what you expected getting into it and what the outcomes have been. But let's talk about the role of audit committees. What role do they fulfill in corporate governance? Maybe you can start the conversation first, Dr. Kona.
The Audit Committee is a statutory committee. So if one looks at the Companies Act, there is a requirement for every entity to constitute an audit committee with a minimum of 3 members. And the audit committee plays an oversight role. It looks at the relationships within the organization, the relationship with management, the relationship with the external auditors, with internal auditors, and all the other assurance providers like the risk management function, compliance, insurance, health and safety. So what the audit committee effectively does is that it is a filter in that it does the hard work so that the financial statements can be submitted to the board with the stamp of approval of having been reviewed in detail by the audit committee. So it makes the work of the board less onerous in that if the financial statements and all the other reports that are tabled at the audit committee come to the board meeting, you'd find that the board meeting would extend over a 2-day period. So the audit committee plays the role of assisting the board and giving it comfort about the integrity of the financial statements, the adequacy and the effectiveness of the controls that reside within the organization, and then from an overall point of view, the competence of the finance function and whether or not the organization has appropriate and sustainable corporate governance. So that, from a high level, is what the Audit Committee does.
I'd like you to elaborate on that, Mr. Nkosi, if you could, as to how the Audit Committee ensures that integrity of financial statements, like Dr. Kona says, how it ensures integrated reporting and internal financial controls, whilst at the same time identifying and managing financial risks in a company.
Thanks, Rowan. I think it is very important for the Audit Committee to have oversight of the different aspects of an organization. And as Dr. Kona has mentioned, it is important that governance is at the center of their duties. And when the finance function produces this financial reports, which then will be recommended to the board, it is important that the Audit Committee has comfort on the integrity of these reports, so that if in the part of the integrated report that deals about qualitative factors must not directly contradict anything that's in the finance report. So it is important that in doing that, the Audit Committee has assessed the capabilities of the finance function within the organization, and they ensure that it's well staffed and with people who are capable to give them such a good quality report at the end of the day.
And Dr. Kona, the role of the Audit Committee extends even further than what we've outlined now, because it ensures compliance with legal and regulatory requirements as well. Talk about the South African legislation that is applicable to both the public sector, to public sector audit committees as well as in the private sector. I mean, is it the same legislative framework that governs both entities?
The principles are the same as far as the public and the private sector are concerned. As far as the public sector is concerned, they're either regulated by the Public Finance Management Act of 99 or the Municipal Finance Management Act. So it depends where the entity is positioned. So by and large, those are the primary pieces of legislation that applies on the public sector, and then you have additional requirements called Treasury regulations that are issued by National Treasury, and then in the case of certain entities, you'll have a shareholder compact like the state and the various government departments has with South African Airways or Eskom or SABC, Elexco and such like. And then we have the protocol on corporate governance. So those are the initial thrusts, and that's where one needs to respond from a governance. But within the entity itself, there are at least 100 different pieces of legislation that the company needs to comply with. So you look at the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, if the company falls within the Companies Act, and then it pays income tax, and you'd have to look at value-added tax, and then one would look at the VE legislation, the labor legislation, and from a compliance point of view, occupational health and safety, and all the other gamut of legislation. So what we do as service providers is to prepare an inventory of all the different pieces of legislation that companies need to be mindful of, and then we specifically target those pieces of legislation that we ensure that the company is obliged to comply with. For example, the tax legislation, the pension funds legislation, the medical aids legislation where payments need to be effected either within 3, 5 or 7 days of month end.
And which companies would fall outside the, for lack of a better word, jurisdiction of the Companies Act?
Well, it depends. Many entities that have been formed in South Africa have had their own pieces of legislation. So one looks at Transnet, you look at Eskom, you look at the SABC, so they have their own founding legislation. But the Companies Act, for the Companies Act to apply, you've got to be registered with the CIPC, and you will have a distinct company registration number, and you've got to complete an annual return, and each time there's a change in the composition of the board of directors or prescribed officers, you'd have to complete certain forms and lodge them. So the Commission for Intellectual Property, which is part and parcel of the DTI, will oversee entities that are registered either as companies or closed corporations or not-for-profit organizations.
All right, this morning we're talking about the role of audit committees in corporate governance, both in the private sector as well as in government. If you'd like to make a contribution to our discussion, please do so. Our telephone number is 0891 104 207. You can SMS your thoughts to 34701. We'd love to hear from you. It's 13 and a half minutes after 11.
I am good on SAFM.
16 minutes after 11, this is Morning Talk on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader, talking about the role of audit committees, the challenges that these committees face, and we will get to that too. And this in light of the 4th Annual Audit Committee Conference, which is in its last day today, which has been put together by Nkonki, and Mr. Nkosi is a partner at Nkonki. He'll tell us why they keep holding, it's in its 4th year, like I said, why they keep holding these conferences, and what the objectives are, and if those objectives have been met. We also have Dr. Zakhele Nkosi, the chairman of Exaro Resources Limited, talking to you as well and taking your calls on 0891 104 207, SMSs to 34701. Now, Mr. Nkosi, what sort of skills, what sort of qualifications, what sort of experience is actually required for an audit committee to carry out its mandate and to do so effectively?
Rona, it's very important for an audit committee to be constituted by members with various skills, which when all put together will add to the good governance of a company. So a typical audit committee will be made up of finance people. These are people who are chartered accountants. You'll get people who are trained, who are legal experts. It's also important to get people who are knowledgeable about the industry in which the company finds itself. So the audit committee itself must be very balanced, but it is important that every member of the audit committee must be knowledgeable, and they must have a purpose to sitting at the audit committee.
In terms of the structure, Dr. Kerner, just reiterate what you said. I think you said a minimum of 3 members are required to constitute an audit committee.
Rowena, the Companies Act, Section 94, subsection 7, requires an audit committee to have a minimum of 3 members. But by and large, depending on the size and complexity of the entity, an audit committee could have between 3 and 6 members. And as my colleague has shared with you, we need varied skills, but financial skills need to predominate on the committee because you are providing an opinion and a review of the numbers as well as the content of the annual financial statements as well as the integrated report. So it's important that the individuals that are in attendance at the audit committee are sufficiently skilled to address these matters in a professional, objective, independent manner without fear or favour.
All right, so let's get to the actual conference. It's the 4th. It's in its final day today. It's been sitting for the past 3 days. What did it seek to achieve primarily, and have those objectives been met, Mr. Nkosi?
Rowena, with the current global economic conditions and the recent collapse of the African Bank and some policy changes around tax, I think we believe that it's important that audit committees members are aware of the various challenges that they will be faced with as the people that are responsible for oversight of companies. So we look at current trends, we look at things that the audit committee members should be doing currently, like Dr. Kona has said. It's important that the audit committees are knowledgeable, and it's important that they participate in meetings. There is no purpose for someone to sit in an audit committee meeting and not be able to participate in looking at the integrated report and promoting proper corporate reporting that needs to come out from that company, because at the end of the day, how the company represents itself through its
You do what I do sometimes,
reports.
think quicker than I speak. All right, now talking about, you just briefly alluded to the kinds of trends that emerge. I'd like you to expand on that, Dr. Kona, just the leading practices that emerge that impact on audit committees and the work that they do, and how they shape the role of these committees going forward.
Rowena, I think it's important for me to also mention that I chair a number of different audit committees, and the Minister of Finance appointed me in 2003 to assist in writing the Auditing Professions Act, and I've had the privilege and the honour of being a participant and a presenter at each of the 4 Nkonki conferences, and I was the last speaker yesterday. But coming back to the issue that you've raised, I think it's absolutely imperative that we look forward, and what has happened in the past is that auditors and audit committees have been criticized in that they look into the rear-view mirror and tell you what has also already transpired. But one also needs to be forward-looking. So some of the aspects that I shared at the conference yesterday is when one needs to be mindful of the escalating demands of corporate governance. So corporate governance is the manner in which entities are directed and controlled, and if you look at the requirements from the various pieces of legislation as well as the King 3 report, one needs to understand how one addresses and how one applies best practice corporate governance. The second aspect from looking forward is one needs to be mindful of what the risks are that could occur within the particular entity one is involved in, and what mitigation is in place to ameliorate any significant impact. Also, we need to have in place, Rowena, planning that can kick in the eventuality of a crisis. So if your chairman of the board or if the CEO is either removed, either naturally or unnaturally, from their function, how could you have a seamless transition? So the audit committee and the board needs to ask the question whether or not succession planning is in place. Fourthly, one needs to look at the aspect of competence, and a growing need that is coming into play is the aspect of compliance. So you need competent people to execute the compliance function. And if one looks at South Africa and the pieces of legislation in terms of FICE and FICA and POPI and all the other pieces of legislation, you need serious professionals that are well skilled in these particular disciplines that can provide guidance. We also need to consider the aspect of cybersecurity, social media, what the policy is within the organization, and the use of Facebook, Twitter, and what is the corporate policy, as well as cybersecurity and everything that attaches to the practice of cybersecurity within the organization and the execution thereof.
All right, and we'll read some SMSs that have come through on this one after this short break. Talking about audit committees, the challenges they face and the trends that have emerged that impact on these committees and how they shape the role of audit committees going forward. And before that break, Dr. Kerner, you spoke about the preemptive abilities of audit committees as opposed to reactive engagements. And in fact, the conference was held under the theme Enhancing Your Oversight Intelligence. Mr. Nkosi, tell us what elements an audit committee would consider when looking forward and increasing that oversight capability as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror, which is the analogy that was made by Dr. Kerner.
It's important that audit committees are able to look at the risks which the company faces, and we must look at the risk in the framework of the industry and what's happening with the world per se. So it's important that the audit committee can see these are the current risks that we face. How will these risks change if you look at the current economic environment and what is projected going forward? Are they expecting any of these risks to be affected, either adversely or otherwise? By events which may happen in the future. So I think risk is important, and it's important that the audit committees can leverage from the various assurance providers within the organization in handling the governance risk in an organization.
And is an audit committee sometimes, Dr. Kerner, is it sometimes blindsided by a risk, or should all audit committees be able to preempt the risks?
I think, Rowena, the question's a fair one. I would say 95% of the time the audit committee would be prepared and mindful of what the risks are. But sometimes, how can one foresee a 9/11 or a tsunami in Japan or what happened in Thailand? So we do scenario planning, and one tries to model what the future is, and then we attach probabilities and impacts to that. So by and large, the audit committee needs to look to the company management and the maturity of the risk process so that one could address those particular issues. So the answer is affirmatively, but there are, in business, you will have a limited number of failures, but you've got to ensure that the impact of that failure is not going to torpedo the success and the viability of your business. And
a good audit committee would be able to see into the future and to preempt, a word that I used earlier, whatever potential risks.
Largely yes. But as I say, can you foresee
a 9/11 or a tsunami?
Yeah, the death of the CEO of Total yesterday in Moscow. You can't foresee. So that's why I indicated earlier that you need good planning and you need succession planning so one could seamlessly address such eventualities should they occur.
All right, I'd like to talk briefly, just before the news headlines, about Nkonki. Why Nkonki put this particular, why have you've been putting these conferences together, and what happens afterwards? I mean, what do you do with the information that you collate at the conference and the stories and trends that emerge from these conferences?
4 years ago, our CEO, Cindy Zilwa, saw a gap in the market. She sits on a number of audit committees, and having the experience of sitting on these audit committees, she identified that there was a need to have a conference of this nature which would help audit committee members and skill them, give them the necessary technical updates, and be able to guide them towards what a good audit committee member should be doing. But just to also answer your question, as you said, the theme is enhancing oversight intelligence. So after the conference, we'll be releasing a few publications on thought leadership on audit committees, basically, and this will be a summary of what has happened in at the conference. Today, specifically, we're having simulations of various audit committee meetings. We have one for departments and SOC and the municipality. And here we focus on the issues, and members that participate and delegates had the option of buying these model packs, and these focus on the issues which audit committees struggle with. So we look to empower audit committee members, basically.
All right. We'll continue this conversation after the news headlines. It's 11:30 and Zakhele Nkosi is at the news desk.
Thanks, Robin. And the headlines: the police ballistics expert has begun testifying in the trial of murder accused Shirenduvani in the Western Cape High Court. Police are not sure if the 3 suspects they are holding in custody are responsible for the shooting and wounding of ANC MP Jackson Mthembu. And the shortage of food at some Limpopo hospitals has once again resurfaced. Details at 12 o'clock.
And that's when we'll have Bongi Kwala joining us on Midday Live, but he's here now to tell us what to expect later. Bongi.
Hey.
Thank you very much, Bongi. Looking forward to it between 12 and 1 right here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. It's 27 minutes to 12 as we continue our conversation with Dr. Nkonki, the chairman of Exaro Resources Limited, and Mr. Zakhele Nkosi, partner at Nkonki. And they have brought us the 4th annual Audit Committee conference, which is in its 3rd and final day today. We're just talking about trends that emerge and also the preemptive role that is played by audit committees. How do they keep tabs on or maybe preempt the latest fraud trends? Can these audit committees, and how do they work around that? Dr. Kona?
Rowena, every entity, as part and parcel of its control mechanism, has a fraud prevention plan. And part of the fraud prevention plan is training within the organization, also the implementation of policies, a code of ethics, and an escalation policy, as well as the use of an anonymous tip-offs line, where you have an external service provider where individuals feel that there is information that might be salient as far as the entity is concerned that does compromise what good conduct is, would report that. So every entity is obliged to have in place a fraud prevention plan, regular fraud training, and the auditors, both the external and internal auditors, do not go out there actively seeking out fraud, but part and parcel of their process is designed that they adopt what we call a skeptical attitude, and they challenge the veracity of the information that is presented to them. So one does pick up these items, but we find that calls to hotlines and whistleblowers in the majority of cases provides examples of what behavior that doesn't accord with good governance is taking place within the organization.
And is that active amongst many corporates? It's just, whistleblowing?
Very significantly so. It's pervasive, and that's in place, and that's an inexpensive tool that is used that could cost maybe as little as 5,000 rand a month, depending on the size and the number of branches of an entity, up to about 15,000 rand per month, where you would have a service provider providing you with a facility that you can call in, send a fax, send an email without your identity being disclosed to the entity over which you are complaining about misbehavior.
Mr. Nkosi?
I think, Rowena, it's also, just to add, it's important that audit committees are aware of the various areas where fraud could occur. Because I think when one talks about fraud, people automatically think of financial statement fraud, where people have this misrepresentation of financial statements. But you also need to look at fraud in terms of asset misappropriation. This is theft of money, theft of inventory. But a big one, which is corruption, which includes kickbacks, for example, misrepresentation in a contract, is one area where audit committee members should be able to have oversight on.
Well, what does Nkonki do? Tell us what your broad range of services includes. What's your portfolio as Nkonki?
We have external and internal audit services. We also have forensic services. We also have a consulting wing. We've got a Nkonki Praxley, which is a corporate finance sister company, which deals with corporate finance basically. So we focus on external and internal audit, accounting services, forensics, as well as corporate finance.
And why are you the best at what you do? I know you're also a member of Creston International. Of what benefit has that membership been to the firm?
This is through this membership we're able to access worldwide skills should we need to. So from time to time we consult with them. They may have experience in areas where we have little experience, and we're able to hone in on those services and those expertise and bring them locally, and we're able to have open and transparent conversations with them on various issues. Should we have a matter here which we're currently discussing, which is an IFRS or IFRS matter or an industry matter, we can just pick up the phone and we're able to consult with them and get more feedback for our clients, basically.
One of the greatest challenges, I would imagine, Dr. Kona, is the independence of the audit committee, which may or may not be impaired because of the relationships that the members of the audit committee has with, or whatever their political standing could be. Talk about how such issues impact on the credibility of the audit committee, because it needs to uphold that credibility, doesn't it?
Rowena, that's a very pertinent issue that you raise. And I think when you look at audit committee, competence is the overriding criterion. So if you appoint individuals that do not have the skill set to execute their tasks, then you compromise the effectiveness of that committee. As far as independence is concerned, we define independence quite clearly in the standards, both of internal and external audit, and various governance tools that are in place defines independence. So what you are looking for is an individual that will make a decision using one's own conscience, being courageous without fear, favor, or fetter. So that's what independence is, that when you look at an issue, that you look at it dispassionately and you opine on that particular matter in terms of what's in the best interest of the entity, what is truthful, and what the test of a prudent or reasonable man or woman would be, that if they had to apply similar facts at their disposal, will come to the same conclusion as you do.
And is it easy to remove yourself from the objective, to be objective?
The overriding criterion of audit committee members, Rowena, is that they need to be independent. So you cannot be a major shareholder or you cannot be an executive and serve on the audit committee. So you've got to have no links to the company, so that the interests that you would be pushing that would serve yourself personally or your family would not take precedence in serving on the audit committee. So we're quite clear, and this is a global minimum requirement, that the individuals that participate thereon are independent in thought, in deed, and in action.
All right. If you'd like to send an SMS, I'd like you to 0891 104 207, talking about the role of audit committees. You can also call us. No, that was the phone number, 0891 104 207. That's the phone number. You can SMS 34701 and put your question to my guests, Dr. Nkonki, the chairman of Exaro Resources Limited, and Mr. Zakhele Nkosi, a partner at Nkonki, and they've put this conference together, which ends today and which has met its objectives, according to Mr. Nkosi. Who are some of the speakers, Mr. Nkosi? And we know that Dr. Nkonki was one of the speakers, and he spoke yesterday, closed the conference yesterday, that is, and he spoke about towards increased oversight. Who were some of the other top speakers that you had, and what were their topics?
We had Lee Roberts on the first day talking about integrated reporting and the importance that the audit committee plays on their role into integrated reporting, basically. We also had the current Auditor General who gave a talk yesterday as well. So we've had varied speakers at the conference. We also had people talking on internal audit and the role of the internal auditors in making sure that the risk of the company is addressed and how they give the comfort to audit committee.
And I know you also had, or you're going to be having, or he's speaking right now, Mr. Ronald Moyo, talking about the 10 key aspects of monitoring and measuring the value of your internal audit function. Well, what points does he make?
The points that he focuses on, he looks at the capacity of the internal audit division, basically within a company. Their independence from the company is also an important factor, and it's important. Combined assurance is important, and as we know that King 3 tasked the board to have combined assurance within a company. So, and internal audit plays a big part of the combined assurance model. So he touches on those elements and focuses on how audit committees can ensure that those are being met by their departments.
All right. Well, we will end it there. Thank you to both my guests for your insights, and all the best with future conferences. I imagine that this is going to be ongoing annually.
Yes, it's definitely an annual conference. We'll have the next one around by the same time this next year, and the theme will be a bit different, looking at the trends that will be apparent at the time. But we look forward to hosting another audit committee conference.
So what would determine those themes? The trends that are...
It depends on the challenges that audit committee members, in our opinion, we see people are facing out there in both in state-owned companies as well as in the top in the JSE listed companies.
And before I let you go, how do we get hold of the publications that you produce as a result of these conferences that you hold?
The publications will be available on our website, so www.nkonki.com, and on the website there'll be links to the publications. These publications that will come after this, and ones which we've released in the past.
All right. Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Nkosi. www.nkonki.com. That's the address that you can visit. Mr. Zakhele Nkosi is a partner at Nkonki, and Dr. Len Kona, thanks to you too.
Pleasure, ma'am.
Thank you. All the best to you. Dr. Kona is the chairman of Exaro Resources Limited, and he was one of the speakers at this conference. It's now 16 minutes to 12.